You have known each other for quite some time and have been in overlapping performance and media worlds that have helped sort of define Los Angeles. And I wanted to talk about those histories and formal stuff about performance and media, because that's my work too, but I'm just very struck at the consistency with which you've both used art to just tackle politics, like straight up literal things about power and violence and those structures in the world.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here. In 1970, Andy Warhol famously said everyone can be famous for 15 minutes. And I thought, oh, okay, I can do that. You know, I can be famous for 15 minutes, I think. And my sister knew the head of the band Blue Cheer, which once was known as the loudest band in the world for their summertime blues. And she introduced me, and so I said, well, you know, I want to do this song. And he said, oh, we don't work with female vocalists. And I said, yeah, but I can't sing, I'm tone deaf. And he said, oh, that's different. So he agreed to help me with this song. And I took the text from Union Oil Company's annual report to its shareholders. My parents had both died when I was pretty young. By the time I was 18, I didn't have either of them. And I had inherited documents and things, and some of these were these shares of Union Oil Company stock. Some of the things that were in my song are still existing today, like the owner of one share of common stock has proposed that the company should make no political contributions. The board of directors recommends a vote against this resolution.
I've known Nancy for quite a few years, and in our getting to know each other, I met her, we were talking about this the other day, how I met her at this feminist video group called Censor. I don't know how many people have heard of that group, but I was very curious in my early career as a video artist to kind of know what other people were doing in the medium. When I started my career, African Americans weren't getting any opportunities to actually show at some galleries. The gallery scene at that time was down La Cienega. Matter of fact, when I went down there, just to see it from when I got out of undergraduate school, I'm in the gallery and the person comes up to me and says, we're not hiring any janitors. And I said, wow, that's what you're thinking, huh? So that's when I actually started realizing there was a little bit of a difference that I had to deal with. And of course, the mural scene was happening in East LA. A lot of people from Osco, Gronk, and Willie Jaron. I could say that I was influenced by the kind of work that they were doing, as well as another group called the LA Fine Art Squad that was painting murals on the West Side. And they had painted this mural on the boardwalk in Venice called Venice in the Snow. And it was a surreal image. You're out in the hot sunshine, and there's this picture of all these people trying to get down the boardwalk. And I was very influenced by the kind of work that they were doing, and all their work was on the west side of town. So I started painting the Rat Trap, and then I was contacted by Judy Baca. And she asked me to join this group of artists. She was going to paint the history of Venice inside the Venice Pavilion. Unfortunately, that building itself no longer exists. Matter of fact, all the work that I painted does not exist. One maybe very faded mural I painted on the DMV over here on Hope Street. You can still see the top of it from the Harbor Freeway, but it's very faded. But that was when I decided to go to grad school And when I went to grad school, I made the transition from painting and drawing into video and performance art. I got influenced by another woman, Barbara T. Smith, who gave a lecture at Otis. This is when Otis was down by MacArthur Park. And I'd already made this video to get into Otis that I didn't really consider necessarily being a performance piece, but I thought I'd give the people in the faculty some idea of what I wanted to do. It's called Massive Images, where I come up from behind these TV sets and I give this little slogan of just the massive images you've gotten to know from years and years of TV shows. The hidden thing, the hurt and pain was written and bitten into your veins. I won't and I don't relate, but I think for some, and when I'm doing this, I've got the sledgehammer that I was going to smash the TV sets. It's too late. Anyway, that's a minor performance for you. There was one that I did here with Senga Noguchi and Maren Hassinger and Frank Parker for the Afro Abstractions exhibition that came from New York, and it was one of the first exhibitions of African American artists who were in Time magazine. So Senga was in that show, and we were all collaborating with each other. We did that performance out in the yard out here, between the trees and the whole thing for the opening of that show.
Nancy, I'm very influenced by performance of the 70s and 80s and love your sort of first performance, the hair transplant, which is one of these performances. And of course, you were, as Ulysses was describing, in a sort of world of performance that included a lot of feminist artists and people who were thinking about the body and being objects, as you've mentioned to me in other conversations. I wonder if you can talk about getting into performance itself, what you were trying to do there. Yeah, Nancy. And nudity, like why was everybody nude in those days?
The hair transplant piece came after I had made a floor piece for my MFA at UC Irvine that was made out of human hair and had then a mandala in the middle of it that was made out of poodle fur. And my thought was, because I was studying with these minimalists, Robert Morris had been a visiting artist at Irvine, and Barbara Irwin was teaching, and really impressed upon us that the art was always in the reception. So I was thinking, well, here it is. It's subtle. It's minimal colors, browns and blacks, and maybe people will walk on it and experience the different textures of the sharp human hair and then the soft poodle fur. Well, Barbara Rose was a visiting critic, and she took one look at it and said, "Oh, I have never seen anything so disgusting." And I was just amazed, and I thought, visceral, I like that. I can do something with that. So I continued to do pieces with hair, and hair really, internationally and in all cultures, hair has all sorts of important ritual power and meaning. And so at a certain point, I felt that it was time to do something with my own hair, to donate my own hair to the work. And that's how the hair transplant came about. And Robert Walker, who's a painter, performed with me. And he had grown a mustache especially for the piece. And he came out in a patient's gown, and I kind of had a lab coat on and took off his gown and proceeded to shave off the mustache and his chest hair, underarms, and his crotch. And then I took a bowl and some scissors and I cut off my own hair. And that was the only time the audience gasped, was when I cut my hair, Shaving his crotch, no, they were fine. But when I cut my hair, everyone went, ah! And then I took hunks of that hair, which I had actually also dyed red, and used spirit gum to replace the hair that I had removed. And I thought it was visually quite interesting because he had black hair and then he had all this red hair on him. And there was still hair left over, so I gave that to the audience, passed it out. In 1974, I had a studio on Laguna Canyon Road in Laguna Beach. And it was in an industrial warehouse. I learned about warehouses by being part of F-Space, where we went together and rented the space so that we could do whatever we wanted as artists. And 2 doors down from where my studio was, the cable company had their offices. And at that time, the cable company was required to give access to the community in order to have their license. They had to provide equipment and also air whatever you did. And I had just done a performance called Tar Baby. And it was pretty simple. I mean, I worked with a performer who covered my body in something that looked like tar, and then placed very brilliant feathers all the way down my body from my neck to my feet. And I thought, you know, I could maybe document this with the cable company's equipment. So I went down and introduced myself and brought their like reel-to-reel, open reel, black and white little camera back to my studio and discovered that my piece was really boring. When I tried to put it on video, didn't have the colors, it didn't have any of the context, but it was a whole other stage and it was a way to reach more people. So that was how I got into video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, public access.
The best.
Looking at your work, Ulysses, you have this, incredible sort of montage technique. I don't know if that's the word you use, but your editing does a lot of juxtapositions and stuff you've shot and stuff that you've appropriated from other media sources and then your own performances. And I know you studied with Betty Saar, and there was this sort of major assemblage tradition in LA that some of your contemporaries were also engaged in. When you look at the Barbara McCullough movie, Shopping Bag Spirits and Freeway Fetishes.
Yes.
There's a sort of interest in ritual and assemblage that was thought of as a particularly kind of black technique. I wonder if when I read your montage technique as related to assemblage, is that right? Or what do you think about that?
Well, that's part of it, but it's ritual. Barbara McCullough also did a film called Water Rituals. Mm-hmm. And that actually, that's really the piece that influenced me about nudity. If you haven't seen that film, she introduces the audience to a naked black woman who walks into the scene and squats down and urinates. And I was so impressed by the power of that action. And the notion of rituals was really became sort of like a language within the African American arts community. David Hammons was in that Freeway Fetishes film you mentioned, and I became good friends with David. Actually, I became good friends with David when you saw that mural, Rat Trap. I was painting that mural, and I come home one day and there's David Hammons. If you know David, that's how he shows up. He just appears. And I because I had a girlfriend in my apartment, I was wondering who's this guy that I don't know in my apartment. And I'm thinking about that old school song, Mrs. Jones. Got a thing going on. So anyway, I was about to approach him like, dude, what are you doing here? When he says, I'm David Hammons and I've heard of you. And I said, what? It stopped me right there. And at that point, we actually became friends. But that answers one aspect of what you were talking about, I hope, just in terms of the notions of ritual as a performance act. And as I was doing my grad school studies, I had come to this point where some of the grad students asked me, how do you think you're going to make it as an artist? And I said, what are you talking about? And they go, well, you can't follow the European history of art in your work. And I said, are you kidding me? As you were mentioning, I was, studying with Betty Saar and Charles White. I got a chance to actually recognize that there was a place to actually do my work and get it shown and all that good stuff. But one day, I don't know how many of you saw my video performance of Two-Zone Transfer. In that video, there's a guy playing the piano. He's one of the minstrels. And that's Kerry James Marshall. Me and Kerry and a few other people that were in that video, we had all studied with Charlie. And one day we were all sitting out in the walkway at Otis, and this guy walks over, this Caucasian gentleman, and he says, look at all the crows sitting on the fence. And before we were able to attack him, Charlie came by and he says, no, don't do that. What you really got to do is bring them to your backyard. And to that extent, that's the really meaningful way of my approaching the work that I make, is to try to bring you to my backyard. But at the same time, I would go back to what you're talking about, Nancy, about how they got in the video. I was painting the Rat Trap, and a friend of mine who was another painter in Venice, Michael Singali, he says, hey man, they got this video workshop on the boardwalk. And they had these guys who had come from New York City, and they had, for those of you who know the history of video, they had a porta pack. That little instrument that Nam June made famous. And so I was thinking about independent film back in those days, Easy Rider, and then Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. And I said, I'd like to try to do something like that myself. But anyway, what I ended up doing, I went to this workshop, and we created this little group called Video Venice News, and we went to the Watts Festival. And I documented the Watts Festival at that time. The reason why I wanted to do it is because if you listen to the media, they say, don't go to Watts. You're going to get killed. The gangs are going to get you. And I said, well, that's not the experience that I had. And so that's why I went out and I videotaped the Watts Festival. And so that particular video, as was in my retrospective, it was getting shown in an exhibition of public access videos in New York City. And that's where I met Maren Hassinger. So when I met Maren and she said, let's meet up in LA, I come to her studio and she introduces me to Sanka Nagudi. And from there we performed as a group. The thing that, for those who may think this is a strategy, we did have a strategy. If you get a show, we all got a show. I mean, that's the kind of way it was back in those days.
Do you have anything to say, having lived the life of an artist now for, you decided to be an artist at some point, and then you made art, and then you just kept making art. And here we are some decades later. I wonder if you can just tell us anything about what that feels like or what that's been like to have committed to art in this way.
Well, when I was thinking about sort of the history of everything, I was remembering that at a certain point in the 70s, when I didn't have a teaching job, and I just thought, oh my God, I'm just spending money and time doing this stuff, making these things, and I have a family, and maybe I should just give up this pursuit of art, even though I had made art all my life. And I walked down to the mailbox, and on that very day, I had a letter informing me that I had just won an NEA grant. It was very small, but it was like, okay, the fates are talking to me, and it really meant a great deal. It was amazing. And sometimes it was a struggle, but the ability to teach was also a real gift, and I'm eternally grateful for being able to do that and be in contact with younger artists and, learn things from them as much as I could tell them anything. And, it's just something that I couldn't ever stop. So.
Having listened to my instructors in grad school, I realized that you have to create a community. When you're a younger artist, you wonder, how are you going to get recognized? And obviously, you get to that point where you're going to do anything for that. And what I did in that sense is I worked together with my friends. All my work has all my friends in it. And I'm fortunate enough that they were not only were they talented, but that they were actually do a volunteer thing and work with me. That was a very fortunate thing for me. And at the same time, the whole group, after this recent retrospective I've had, they've gotten the recognition I thought that they could get. I worked in multicultural premise. My work that was like that. I tended to not necessarily like the segregation that happens in the art world, because when you walk out your door, you don't just see one kind of people. I grew up in LA in a part of the time when integration was happening. The early 60s, going back that far I'll just leave it at this, but when I was in high school and they had this class called art production, and it was a class that was going to teach you how to do commercial art. And the first thing that I realized, that I really had a disdain for the teacher, because she wanted to tell me what to create. And then one day somebody told me, there's another thing called the fine arts. And I said, the fine arts, what is that? So I pursued the fine arts. And that's how I became an artist.